Monday. This is Jay Brew, co-chairman of Seafried and Brew. Well, as the stock market slowly starting to make its way back after a disastrous Friday in here, is that Dr. Ed and I suggest that we look at things more from the 30,000 foot level. So one of the things that has been brought up over and over again as a reason for the decline in our stock market, as well as for the lowering of interest rates in here, is the whole contagion of the European situation. And what we want to do is to bring this into some kind of strategic thought process, some type of strategic relationship to our own economy. So what we did is that we looked at a map of the United States and looked at all of the different various economies from around the world and how they fit into the GDP of those states. Interestingly enough, Greece, which has been really up and in the news, is that you're looking at that as being about the size of the state of Connecticut in here. When you look at, say, France, size of into California, Italy, the size of New Mexico. So as we hear these different economies and hear the different problems in Europe, the question still remains, is that should this be having the kind of effects that it's having on us, especially as a trading partner? Because in comparison, is that look at that this overall size of the state of Canada in relationship to Texas. When you look at even, say, like a South Korea in here, is that South Korea the size of Florida? So when we hear these different countries and their effects, the question is that compared to the strength of our U.S. economy, it brings up two questions. Is the stock market way oversold, which we believe it is in here? The second would be the fact that on an overall basis, in comparison to the world, why would we be downgraded to a AA plus? It doesn't figure at all. When we also talk about going forward in here strategically, is that we're working on writing a new strategic planning book. And within that new strategic planning book, we're really looking at it from the standpoint of what the duties of a bank director, a community bank director, should be post-financial crisis. And we're really looking at recreating the strategic planning process to meet up with capital preservation. So when we look at the duties and how they've changed over these past couple of years based on what has happened, is that we can look at the first duty to preserve and build the bank's capital to produce value for the bank's stakeholders through proper strategic planning. And when we think of that, once again, to preserve and build capital, is that the point that I've made over and over again in like our capital planning books and our articles about capital planning, is that the failed banks did not have enough capital in order to survive. And it wasn't ratio driven, it was risk driven. So when we're looking at these pieces in terms of the duties, is that we want to align these, not only just from a regulatory perspective, but from a due diligence and safety and soundness perspective. We want to create, as part of the strategic planning process, to create a capital plan that will preserve, manage, and build the bank's capital. So once again, the capital plan being the real foundation of the strategic plan, but now we want to add that to the duties of a bank director to essentially create that capital plan. Also, what we want to be able to do is to set risk parameters within the capital plan that once again will preserve and build capital and will provide consistent earnings commensurate with the bank's risk parameters. So when we look at this, is that we can sit there as directors in terms of looking at what risks do we have to our capital. It's interesting. What is happening is that a number of the speeches that I've gotten here recently are all about risk management, interestingly enough. I still believe that you need to take it back to these duties of a bank director as a starting point that then builds the strategic plan and builds the capital plan. We also want to provide management with independent dynamic risk models to be able to really assess risk. When we look at independent models, for instance, that's why we've developed the Seyfried and Brew Total Risk Index and all of its components, including capital risk, credit risk, economic risk, earnings at risk, and liquidity at risk. So when we look at these, is that it provides you with that independent dynamic risk modeling to sit there and say that instead of being insular, that one is able to look at risk from an overall perspective and really understand how and what kind of risk you're taking versus the industry. You need to also evaluate the CEO's performance in carrying out the management duties of the strategic plan and the capital plan. So once again, that evaluation of that CEO is very important in terms of how is this risk being managed out there. And then we want to have a full understanding as directors. Okay? There's no excuses this time around. A lot of directors of the failed institutions and institutions that had issues was, I didn't know, I didn't understand. But I think this time around that what you want to be able to do is to have that full understanding of all these duties through education, asking questions, and having lively discussion, talking about all of these different aspects. And when it really comes down to it, because many of you know that I'm also a community bank director, is that we want to be able to provide due diligence through proper oversight. That this whole banking situation that has happened over these past couple of years won't happen, one, to my bank, and it won't happen to us as an industry at the level that it did. So when we look at it, is the due diligence, of course, from the standpoint of how the regulators would look at it, how an outsider looks at it, is that due diligence through proper oversight. So this is some of the first thoughts that we've had in terms of how do we look at strategic planning now post-financial crisis. We'll be coming out with this book and different articles talking about this, and once again, it can be part of your overall strategic planning process. This is Jay Brew, co-chairman of Seyfried and Brew. Have a good week.